Hello children. Today we are going to read chapter 1, pages 11 to 15 of the reader Little Lord Fauntleroy. But before we begin, I would like to give you a recap of the previous lesson. In the previous lesson we read that Cedric learned to read when he was very little. He was especially interested in politics. Cedric was a friendly child whom everyone liked, and his maid adored him. Cedric easily made friends with people of all ages. His best friend was old Mr. Hobbs, the grocery man, whose store Cedric visited every day. Now let's turn to page 11. It was quite surprising how many things Cedric and Mr. Hobbs found to talk about. The 4th of July, for instance. They could talk about the American Day of Independence for a long time. Now, Mr. Hobbs and Cedric could talk about a lot of things together. It was surprising because of their difference in age. Now, for instance, they would talk about the 4th of July, the Independence Day of the United States of America. And they could talk about American Day of Independence for a long time. Mr. Hobbs had a very bad opinion of the British. He said they were great villains. The British are the English people belonging to England. England is also known as Great Britain because Great Britain is divided into 3 parts: England, Scotland and Wales. And England is the largest part of Great Britain. So Mr. Hobbs did not have a very good opinion of the British, and he also thought that they were villains. And you know that a villain is somebody who is harmful or dangerous. Now you see, previously we read that the Earl hated the Americans. So in the same way, the Americans hated the British. Let's read on. What he liked were the patriotic heroes of America. He would even recite parts of the Declaration of Independence, and Cedric would get so excited that his heart would beat fast when he listened. So Mr. Hobbs liked the patriotic heroes of America. Patriotic heroes are people who love and support and defend their country and have performed courageous acts of nobility. So these were the people Mr. Hobbs liked. And Mr. Hobbs would recite parts of the Declaration of Independence. He had probably memorized some of the parts of the Declaration, and he recited them to Cedric, who listened with great interest, and he would also become very excited. And because of excitement, his heart would beat very fast. And Declaration of Independence was the first formal statement by the American people mentioning their rights to choose their own government. So it was a very important paper. Let's read on from here. One day when Cedric was visiting Mr. Hobbs, a very odd thing happened. A very strange thing happened. They were talking about England and the Queen. Mr. Hobbs said that he did not like the English royalty. He did not like earls or dukes, and he was being very stubborn about it. So one day, Cedric and Mr. Hobbs, they were discussing and talking about England and the Queen, and Mr. Hobbs said that he did not like the English royalty. Royalty meaning people of royal blood or royal status. He said he did not like them. He said he did not like earls or dukes. We already know what an earl is. A duke is also a titled person appointed by the prevailing king or queen, just like an earl, but more powerful. A duke had more powers. It was a higher rank. And Mr. Hobbs was being very stubborn about it, meaning that he was unwilling to change his opinion on it. He was very rigid on this point. Let's read on from here. "Did you ever know any dukes, Mr. Hobbs?" Cedric asked, "or earls?" "In fact, I did not," said Mr. Hobbs, "but I don't like them." "Maybe they wouldn't be earls if they knew any better," said Cedric, starting to feel bad for the earls and the dukes. Now Cedric, being a very sensible child, asked Mr. Hobbs if he knew any earls or dukes, because Mr. Hobbs hated them so much, so probably Cedric thought that he knew some of them. But of course Mr. Hobbs had never known any earls or dukes, but he just didn't like them. And then Cedric responded by saying that maybe they wouldn't be earls if they knew any better, meaning Cedric thought that maybe if the earls and dukes knew how terrible it was to be what they were, then they wouldn't be so. They wouldn't want to be earls or dukes. "Wouldn't they?" said Mr. Hobbs. "They just love it. It's all they want. They're a bad lot." So Mr. Hobbs refuses to change his opinion. Alright, so let's read on. Cedric and Mr. Hobbs were in the middle of this conversation when Mary appeared. Cedric thought that maybe she had come to buy some sugar, but she said that wasn't it. Her eyes were shining like she was excited about something. "Come home, darling," she said to Cedric. "The mistress is wanting you." Now you see, Mary is an uneducated person, so she's not pronouncing her words correctly. Instead of saying darling, she's saying darling. Instead of wanting, she's saying wanting. And she's referring to Cedric's mother as mistress, obviously because she's the maid. Cedric slipped down from his stool. "Goodbye, Mr. Hobbs," he said. "We'll talk more about the earls and dukes tomorrow." Mary was staring at him, shaking her head. "What's the matter, Mary? Has the sun given dearest a headache?" Cedric asked anxiously. Cedric was worried about his mother, thinking that the heat might have given her a headache. But Mary said it was not that. Cedric rushed home with her, feeling nervous. When they reached the house, there was a fancy carriage outside. Someone was in the little parlor talking to Dearest. A parlor is a sitting room in a private house. Mary wouldn't let Cedric go into the parlor just yet. Instead, she hurried him upstairs to put on his best summer suit, the cream-colored one with the red belt. She told him to find his best shoes too. When he was dressed at last, he ran down into the parlor. The visitor was a tall, thin old gentleman with a sharp, serious face. He was sitting in an armchair. Dearest was standing nearby with a pale face. There were tears in her eyes. She had a pale face, probably because she was afraid or was worried about something. "Oh, Ceddie," she cried. She ran to him and held him in her arms. The tall old gentleman rose from his chair and looked deeply at Cedric for a long while. He didn't seem displeased. "And so," he finally said, "this is little Lord Fauntleroy." He didn't seem displeased, meaning he was pleased. Displeased is the opposite of pleased, meaning he liked Cedric when he saw him. And then he said, "So this is little Lord Fauntleroy." So a very interesting turn of events, but we will read about it in the next chapter. since we have come to the end of chapter 1. At the end of the lesson, I have a few questions for you. You can send the answers to these questions to me by making an audio or a video, but you don't have to write down the answers of these questions. You may discuss them with your siblings or your parents. Question number 1 is, what kind of things did Cedric and Mr. Hobbs talk about when they sat together in Mr. Hobbs' grocery store? Question number 2 is, did Mr. Hobbs have any solid reason for disliking the English royalty? We will meet again very soon. Until then, goodbye.